So do you know a little bit about the organization and why I'm interviewing you?
You go right ahead and tell me about it. How does that sound?
So I know sort of we reached out to, because we sit around the corner from the Institute in Brisbane. So I spoke to Dr. Martin yesterday. So we're all in the same little eating disorder little sector here in Brisbane. Right. So we, Eating Disorders Queensland, so we're funded by the Department of Health here in Queensland to support people with eating disorders, do clinical treatment, support people with eating disorders and their families. And we're the only sort of out-of-hospital, community-based treatment that Queensland Health is funding currently. So we're supposed to do like a statewide service, but we're a medium-sized service, so it's always a little bit of a struggle to get to everybody, but that's our main aim, to be the step down from your hospital and health services, day programs, and then clients tend to come through to us next. However, we do get a lot of self-referrals from people within the community. So that's just our little gig, and we thought we would touch base with your research and get some information and see how we as a non-for-profit can support that research. So,
wonderful, great.
I had a little chat yesterday with Dr. Martin, but I thought maybe if you could tell me too your research aims and what you're hoping to find, and what will that bring us as a sector.
Yes, sure, happily. So this is EDGI, or the Eating Disorders Genetics Initiative. And to put it sort of in Star Trek terms, it's the next generation of our genetic work, because we finished up ANGI, the Anorexia Nervosa Genetics Initiative, which Australia played a huge part in, and that reaped great benefits. So, the results of that are very much what launched us into doing this study. And is it okay if I just take a second and say what those results were?
Absolutely, that'd be lovely. Okay. Yes, yeah.
So that study, ANGI, we got almost 17,000 people in about 3.5 years with anorexia, plus 55,000 controls. And not only did we identify the first 8 loci, or areas on the genome that were associated with anorexia, we calculated these genetic correlations that really showed us that we know that anorexia has a sort of a psychiatric genetic component, but they also showed that anorexia has a metabolic genetic component. And I think that was sort of like, if I had to like put in a little marble what the key finding was from that study, that was it.
Yes.
And that's telling us, we need to not just look at the psychiatric piece, we need to understand this metabolic piece as well.
Yes, yeah.
So that was sort of our launch pad.
And I think that was sort of what caught my eye too when we were reading those outcomes, that the metabolic rate was an interesting find, because I don't think that is something you expected, correct? So the premise was that people with this higher metabolic rate are more susceptible to developing anorexia nervosa.
Right, and whether it's metabolic rate or what about the metabolism, that's actually the next question. This basically tells us that that's the question we need to answer. We need to sort of dig deeper now. And I think that's sort of the beauty of some of this genetic work, is it tells you where to look.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like when we looked at the genetic correlations with the other psychiatric disorders, that part was no surprise.
No.
The strongest genetic correlation with obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
And it's like, but in some ways that's kind of exciting too, because it's almost like genetic validation of what we see in the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yes, I've been seeing this co-occurring pattern for, I won't say how many years I've been in the field. But now, the genetic research is saying, and the reason is that there's a strong genetic correlation between those two illnesses, meaning the same genes are acting. So that was pretty cool.
That was really cool. Now, if we look at the genetic side of it, and then we look at, and I know part of that research, the Angie's trial talked a lot about the genetic side, but also what happens in the environment. And I think too, for us in practice, we're very excited about the genetic stuff, but what is the implication for us working with people? But also there's these very strong environmental influences, especially for our cohort around trauma.
Yes. Yeah. And that's somewhere we can go. So yes. I'm going to answer your question in two different ways. 1 second. On one hand, this next step, or EDGY, is not just anorexia, right? We're broadening out to include bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorder as well. Yeah. And I'm mentioning that first because we also see that trauma is a big issue in those populations. But the really amazing thing about this type of work is there's a group out there parallel to ours, for example, that does genetic research on post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma. So they have hundreds of thousands of samples of people with PTSD and with post-traumatic symptoms, and they're doing the same kind of work that we are. We can then come together. Yeah. We put our data together with their data, and we can look, for example, at which people with eating disorders have high genetic risk for susceptibility to trauma. Because one of the things we've never understood is why two people can be exposed to the exact same traumatic event, and one can develop horrific PTSD and maybe later an eating disorder, and another one doesn't. And this is the genetic information makes the environment more tractable. We can almost understand the environment better if we understand a person's genotype who is responding to that environment. And that's how we put the two together. It's not genetics alone, ever. We know that. But this helps us get at the environment in a more systematic way.
Yes. And that's really interesting work around the trauma, because we're always saying, yes, we hear that, but what does the future look for us when we're supporting people and doing clinical interventions, because there's such an impact around trauma and the brain.
Yeah.
So what does our interventions in the future look like for people specifically on eating disorders and this trauma-informed practice and the impacts? Yeah.
And I will even say trauma impact on the brain and trauma's impact on gene expression.
So can you talk a little bit about that? The trauma's impact on the genes? What
the gene expression on which genes are activated and which genes are working. And I think that's sort of that's the next generation that we'll be able to look at. Really talking about epigenetic changes or ways in which the environment impacts on how the genome is working, what it's doing, what proteins it's coding for. And one of the things that is great about EDGY is we're not just getting information about the eating disorder. So one of the questionnaires that participants fill out online is a trauma questionnaire. So within this large sample of people with eating disorders, we'll have a whole range of people who have or have not experienced different types of trauma. So this is really going to sort of enrich our understanding of really how complex the eating disorders population is. It isn't just anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. It's who also has anxiety, who also has a trauma history, who also has depression. And, right now, when we offer treatments to people, it really is sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of deal, right?
It's like diagnostically driven, but like the talk at the ICE conference, the transdiagnostic conversation.
Right.
The neurotransmitters don't fire because of as per diagnosis.
No, they didn't pay attention. They weren't reading the book like we were, right? But that's it. We might actually find that people with particular genotypes respond better to one type of treatment than another type of treatment. And right now, genes don't play a role in helping us decide what types of treatment to offer people. And, the goal is eventually to get to that point. And we know that there are, other medical conditions where, genetics do help you decide which treatment is best. For example, cancer treatment. We use genetic information all the time to decide what kind of chemotherapy someone should get. But we haven't gotten to that point yet in psychiatry. And the hope is that we will get to that point.
Yeah.
But to do it, we need huge sample sizes. And that's why we're doing EDGI.
Yeah. Now, if we look at the outcomes, like you say, you've touched on it, you want to look at sort of this personalized treatment approach. So what does that look like? Is it a therapeutic intervention? Is it a intervention with drugs? What are your aims around that?
I think we'll be going in both directions. So on the one hand, as I mentioned, we will be able to look at whether different genotypes predict, for example, who might respond better to CBT or EBT or one of the other types of therapies. So that's one possibility. But another possibility, especially for anorexia, but also for bulimia and binge eating disorder, we actually have no medications that target the biology of the illness. Right? So for bulimia, we have Prozac, but we borrow that from depression. For binge eating disorder, we have lisdexamfetamine or Vyvanse. We borrow that from ADHD. We've never had our own medication. And hopefully, once we start finding more genes, and there will be hundreds, they'll start assorting into pathways that might point us toward new drug discovery. So maybe we will be able to develop medications that actually target the underlying biology of the illness.
And that is a really exciting pathway, looking at that tailor-made treatment, what suits the person best, because we often find that's where a lot of the next layer of trauma lies. People keep trying things, the constant hospitalization. So how onerous is it that not on the individual and their families?
Yes. And that is actually another really important piece. One of my PhD students is starting to look at genetic and environmental predictors of those people who go on to develop severe and enduring forms of the illness. Because right now, if someone walks through our door for the very first time at age 11 with anorexia nervosa, we have no way of predicting whether that person is at risk for developing a severe course. We treat everyone as if they're at risk for that, but we actually don't have the ability to look at them biologically to say, are you at risk for repeated hospitalizations or 5 or 6 episodes of renourishment, or reaching an extremely low and dangerous BMI? And hopefully our genetic research will be able to tell us who's at most risk for that kind of a presentation. And that also helps us sort of decide where to put our resources. Because if we see someone who like they're at the top decile of genetic risk for developing a severe illness, we need to come out with all guns blazing in the very beginning, right? To try to change that person's course. So it could really help us with resource allocation and with making those very early treatment decisions that will help mitigate really poor outcomes. And mitigate that severe and persistent and enduring eating disorder that just devastates people's lives and the economic burden. Their families and everyone around them.
So timelines around the research. What is your predictors around timeline? And part of this is where you can help too. The faster we can get these samples, the faster we can do the study. And I think one of the things that frustrates me, and I know it frustrates patients and families as well, is how slow science is. That is just infuriating because we want answers now. And we're geared up,
Professor Martin is geared up
Geared
in Australia to get those samples in, and we're getting geared up here. And New Zealand is geared up, and Denmark's geared up, and we're getting geared up in Sweden and the Netherlands and Mexico. And basically getting the world on board to get as many samples as fast as possible. And then we just run them through genotyping, and then we start doing the analytic work. And there's not going to be one endpoint to this research. It's going to be coming out in pieces. Like, hopefully we'll have a preliminary answer about some of the questions about severe and enduring anorexia relatively soon. But the trick is, as our sample size gets bigger, those results become more firm and more convincing. And that is the trick to all of this research. It's all about numbers.
So is that a struggle for you to get the people to participate? Has that been a bit of a barrier for the trial or the research?
Well, we just started. The good thing about, like, when we launched in New Zealand in March, we had 1,000 people sign up within the first 48 hours. Then we had this slight problem with COVID stepping in, and that kind of interrupted things. But hopefully we've got the procedures worked out now, so there's nothing standing in the way. It was a little tougher with Angie because we were drawing blood from everyone.
Yes, yeah.
But now it's so simple. All you do is you go up online, you fill out questionnaires, and then we send you a spit kit. You spit into it and you pop it in the post and send it back to us, and that's it.
That's it, yeah.
So we've made it easier for people to participate.
Yeah, and people just go to the website and fill in the details there. Yeah,
exactly.
And we will attach all those details to this interview so people can see that, and definitely disseminate that across our community for people who are interested.
Thank you, because we want everybody to feel like they're part of the research.
Yes, and they're part of the solution.
They're part of the solution. It's like, we can't do this by ourselves. It is.
How empowering is that?
Yeah.
Was there anything, a really key message that you really want to get across and you want us to share with people?
That is really my key message. And that is, from my perspective, the rich part about being involved with this research is talking about it with people who have lived experience, talking about it with families, talking about it with advocates and clinicians, and getting everyone involved, knowing that we are a team, and we need each other in order to find these solutions. So work with us, we'll work with you, contact us. If we do anything that bothers you, let us know. Because every once in a while we might do something that just rubs people the wrong way, and we want that feedback, because our job is really to serve the eating disorders community. So we're happy, we love hearing from you.
Well, this was really informative, and it was great to have a conversation with you. And I think this just really the next step for us in supporting people in recovery and their loved ones as well. So we as Queensland Eating Disorders Queensland are looking forward to supporting this and getting this out as much as possible for you. So thank you so much for chatting with me.
And thank you so much for the interview, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other face to face once the world opens up again.
Yes, because we're always supposed to be in Sydney.
Exactly.